In the bustling city of Onitsha, Grace lived in a small, crumbling shack with her mother, Esther, on the edge of the market. Esther sold roasted yam by the roadside, barely making enough to feed them both. Grace, at 10 years old, was different from other children. She couldn't read or write. Her mother had tried to send her to school, but the fees were too much and Grace struggled to keep up. The other kids noticed. They called her empty head and laughed when she stumbled over simple words. Grace would run home, her eyes wet, clutching her mother's wrapper. "Why can't I read, Mama?" she'd whisper. Esther would hug her tightly and say, "You're smart in your own way, my child. Don't let them make you feel small." By the time Grace was 13, the mockery grew worse. At the market, where she helped her mother carry yams, the other children were relentless. "Grace, spell cat," one boy Chitty shouted, and the group around him burst into laughter when she froze, her lips trembling. "She can't even write her name," a girl named Ada added, tossing her hair. Grace's cheeks burned as she turned away, pretending to arrange the yams. At night, she'd lie on their thin mattress, staring at the leaky roof, wishing she could disappear. Esther saw her pain, but could only offer words. "God gave you a good heart, Grace. That's worth more than books." One afternoon, as Grace carried a basket of yams through the market, she tripped, and the yams spilled across the dusty ground. The other kids laughed, but a man in a clean shirt stopped to help. His name was Mr. Daniel, a teacher who ran a small evening school for adults. He saw Grace's embarrassment and spoke gently. "Would you like to learn to read?" he asked. Grace looked down ashamed. "I'm not smart enough," she mumbled. Mr. Daniel smiled. "Anyone can learn with time." He offered to teach her for free at his evening classes. Esther, overjoyed, agreed, and Grace began attending, though she was terrified of failing again. The evening school was in a small hall near the church. Grace sat at the back, her heart racing as Mr. Daniel wrote letters on a chalkboard. The other students were older, traders, drivers, mothers, but none mocked her. Slowly, Grace learned to trace letters, sounding them out under Mr. Daniel's patient guidance. It was hard. She mixed up E and D, and her handwriting was shaky. Sometimes she wanted to quit, but Mr. Daniel's kind words kept her going. "You're doing better every day," he'd say. At home, Esther clapped when Grace wrote her name for the first time, tears in her eyes. "My daughter, you're going to shine," she said. Word spread that Grace was learning to read. Instead of fading, the taunts grew sharper. One day, as she walked home from class, Chitty and Ada blocked her path. "So, you think you're a scholar now?" Ada sneered, snatching Grace's notebook and tossing it into a puddle. Chitty laughed. "She'll never be like us." Grace picked up the soggy book, her chest tight. She wanted to scream, but held back. At home, she cried in Esther's arms. "They hate me, Mama." "Why?" Esther wiped her tears. "They're afraid of what you're becoming. Keep going, Grace." That night, Grace promised herself she wouldn't stop, no matter what. Years passed, and Grace kept at it. By 17, she could read books and write letters. She wasn't perfect, but she was proud. Mr. Daniel encouraged her to take exams, and she passed her primary school certificate, then her secondary school exams. She worked harder than anyone, studying by candlelight while helping Esther at the market. The taunts didn't stop completely, but Grace learned to ignore them. She started dreaming bigger. Maybe she could be a teacher like Mr. Daniel or even work in an office. Esther beamed with pride, telling everyone, "My Grace is going places." At 22, Grace got a job as a clerk in a small company in Onitsha. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. She typed letters, kept records, and earned enough to move Esther into a better house. One day, at the market, she saw Chitty and Ada. They weren't laughing now. Chitty drove a motorcycle taxi, his clothes worn. Ada sold vegetables, her eyes tired. They avoided Grace's gaze, but she walked up to them. "I hope you're doing okay," she said kindly. They mumbled replies, shame on their faces. Grace didn't gloat. She knew pain too well to wish it on others. A few years later, Grace opened a small school for children who couldn't afford fees, teaching them to read and write just as Mr. Daniel had taught her. The market people now called her Auntie Grace, and parents begged her to take their kids. One evening, as she taught a class, Chitty came to the school. He held his cap in his hands, nervous. "My son needs help with reading," he said quietly. Grace smiled. "Bring him tomorrow." As he left, she looked out at her students, her heart full. They had mocked her, but she had risen. She wasn't just a girl who couldn't read anymore. She was Grace, the woman who changed lives. Thank you for watching. Kindly like, comment, subscribe, and share for more interesting stories.